Go for Leadership, the podcast with Daniel and Gert.
Hello and welcome for the Go for Leadership podcast. I welcome today Lou Everett and Sherri McManus. They are my guests today. Hello and welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks, Daniel.
Thank you, Daniel.
Appreciate it, man.
Go for Leadership interviews.
And like always, I give you 30 seconds for your introduction. So Louis and Sherri, time is ticking.
No problem. Hey, we do good on a time crunch.
Yes, we do.
That's all right. So, you go ahead and take that one.
All righty. Well, my husband and I, we are a married couple. We are the Lou Everett Group, and we are certified executive leadership and personal development and coaches and corporate trainers. So we really focus on leadership development and effective communication for small businesses. And how we do that, we actually provide direct strategies, I should say, to help build leaders from within. We prevent toxic work culture, and we provide compliance training such as diversity and inclusion.
Yep,
wow, I love
it. In a nutshell.
Awesome. So you are spot on with leadership, and the next question that we usually ask our interview guests are, what is leadership meaning to you? What is the passion that you follow with leadership, or how would you even define leadership in your context?
That's a good one for you.
Yeah. Well, leadership is I can sum this up in one word. It's influence. Leadership is influence. It's nothing more, nothing less. It's influence. Because truly how a person influences another positively or negatively really depends upon the person. But that is what leadership is. It's influence. Now, to be a good leader or a bad leader, now there's a whole separate question here, right? To be a good leader, obviously the positive influence that you have on other people, so they want to follow you, not because they have to follow you. See, big difference. You can accomplish a lot more when they want to follow you. So, in a nutshell, leadership is influence.
I love that because it's I've never received a definition of a one word, and I like that somehow. That in a very profound and deep context, it's really like you just mentioned, right? It's influence.
Right.
So you just brought in as well the definition of a good and a bad leader. Maybe we can talk and deep dive a little bit about that one. So most likely, some of your clients maybe not particularly define themselves as bad leaders, but of course they ask for your support. Mm-hmm. What are the requests they have to you, how to improve, or what are the headaches that keep them awake at night?
Yeah, and that comes in a variance of depending on their situation, right? So things that we hear an awful lot on is, how do I navigate corporate culture? So that brings us to, and of course, when we address that, now we address, well, tell me about that corporate culture. What does that culture look and feel like, right? And then, of course, as we dig deeper in, those that come to us and that we understand is a good fit for us, and we make sure that we're a good fit for them, is that they are at a moment in their career or their life. Most of the time, it's because they're being reactive. They're in a situation where, hey, I'm stuck in a rock in a hard place here, and I don't know how to accomplish X, Y, Z. Or they've come to us and they've been given an ultimatum: either you get stronger as a leader, or you may not have a career. And so those topics range from understanding just time management. Those are the basic stuff, right? Time management is what they talk about.
Infamous work-life balance. Communication's
another one.
Is a hot button.
That ends up being a big piece of what we help our clients with once we dig deeper to find out where the root causes are of their current struggle. And a lot of times it boils down to development. You know, the challenges that leaders face today. I mean, here's the reality, Daniel, really, right? Well, we're in a leadership deficit in this world, period. We really are. And leadership's not positional. It just isn't. Position has nothing to do with being a good leader. It has every single thing to do with how you influence other people, but you have to develop yourself first as a leader. right? It starts with you and ends with you as a leader.
So you mentioned quite of interesting challenges that I can completely, let's say, reconcile. One strong topic that I my day-to-day business as well receive a lot is communication, right? I mean, you said influence, and to influence, you need to have, let's say, somebody that you can influence. And to do that, communication is one of the pillars, let's say, to influence. So how would you describe maybe deficits that you have encountered in the clients, let's say, and how, what solutions or what ways you have brought with them to elaborate, to improve the way of communication. In particular, now in the distance that we are, right? We are all within Corona still. I think there are certain challenges to really communicate to the teams or the people that we want to influence. Let's say it this way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, here, let me put it this way. Communication can be done in many ways. But my father was in the military all growing up. He was in the Army, United States Army, right? And his way of communicating to us and even to his people that he led in the Army, it was loud, right? They were just loud and direct. That's just the way the culture was. See, communication really isn't what draws success. It's about connecting with people. So using your communication in a way that connects with people. See, it's connection that really is the rub here, not communication. People can communicate all the time. Just turn on the media. I mean, there's communication everywhere, but does that communication truly connect in a way that adds value to other people and creates change or creates movement, right? So connection is really where it begins. And so those are the deficits that we've seen in some of our clients is, well, I'm communicating, right? But are you connecting with people? And how do you do that?
And I would add to that is not only is the connecting pieces is a key proponent. However, how do you measure that, right? So we all know the infamous, there are assessments out there, and we actually have one as well. And about a communication specifically on the language. How do you communicate? What is your own leadership style, or at least own communication? So you don't know what you don't know. And that's why some of these assessments that we are familiar with, I mean, there's a Myers-Briggs, there's DISC, there's all these, right? And I think they're a great foundation, no matter which one that you pick. It has an understanding, especially as a leader, we always start with ourselves. You can't lead anyone unless you know yourself. So when you actually find that proponent with yourself and going, oh, well, I'm a very detailed person. So therefore, when I communicate to another detailed person oriented, there's a connection there. However, there's a very common situation that we have seen very common is that when there's a leader that's a very high level, just give me the facts. I don't need the details. And then you have someone that is very detailed. That's where the clash can happen. And as a leader, it is so imperative to really understand going, okay, wait, I'm this way. Let me understand my team because that's how they communicate. So we got to go where they are. So we're all on the same page. Because then if not, that's where frustration comes in. That's where toxic work environment comes in, and misunderstandings, morale. I mean, all the negative, it's a slippery slope. So just think that there's a way to be proactive. And honestly, it's a responsibility as a leader. It's huge to understand not only yourself, but also what that language is to your team to get the most effective, which quite frankly, we know the bottom line. We all know that's a factor. But imagine that your team can produce more when you can actually connect and communicate correctly.
So and understanding each other's communication style is a big thing. As a leader, it's a responsibility and frankly a burden of ours to lead people effectively. And it has to start with us. So the first thing in communication is, okay, how can I identify the communication style of each member of my team? So that when I meet with them, when I talk with them, when I try to direct them in accomplishing the goals that we have set out to accomplish in a way that they're going to connect with us and actually want to work with us to get and accomplish those bottom line goals without trickling down the pressure, if you will.
So one of the things that you describe, I think there are certain skills required for every leader, which is self-awareness as well as intimacy with the people that we influence, and empathy to understand what are their needs, right, in order to react on those.
Yeah.
So do you have seen a certain, let's say, status quo, as you also remembered, and you mentioned that there's a huge deficit in the current leaders that you have recognized, and I can only agree. So do you think that the people have lost that kind of skills or that kind of self-awareness and empathy?
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't believe people have lost it. What we believe and what I believe is that those that have been moved into leadership roles or positions have been put there based on performance, not necessarily based upon their leadership ability. Mm-hmm. And many times that leadership ability hasn't been trained or hasn't been learned. And that's a leader's fault. And it's our responsibility to not just find those that have good leadership qualities, but to equip them, to provide them the necessary attention to help them grow. If we can't mentor them, we can't give them that focus and give them the ability to grow as strong leaders in their role, not just in their position, but in life in general, then what we're doing as a leader is we're setting them up for failure. We're setting them up for failure. So I don't think it's I think it's lost. What I believe what's lost really is that we don't know what we don't know. So we're promoting people in positions that may have leadership traits, but what are we doing to develop those? What are we doing to help them really become strong, powerful, effective leaders?
And I love that because I can see that happening in the different companies I've worked for. That you are completely right. Normally the performers get promoted, but not necessarily that are the good leaders, right? Maybe they are, in fact, they can perform on their very specific scope, and they are excellent. But of course, to be a leader has completely different qualities in the field or as a requirement. So you touched something which I'm. One of the root causes, let's say, or ideas of the podcast, of course, is to help leaders to develop. Do you think there are good traits these days to develop good leaders, or what would be needed, let's say? And I mean, that's already a certain question and an answer expected, right? So do you think there are certain improvements required, and what are the things you would change, let's say, to develop good leaders?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's good. I'm glad you're asking that question.
Yeah. Lots of characteristics.
There's
right?
lots of characteristics, but it starts with the leader themselves who are moving other people into those roles. Mm. See, the challenge comes down to is if you're going to effectively grow your business, whether you're a department head or whatever it might be in a position. We're talking positional here right now. But it is, from our perspective, leadership is not about position, right? It's really about the influence again. And when you can have influence over your peers, and then to bring them on board and connect with them so they actually help you accomplish a goal as well. See, it doesn't necessarily have to be because you lead them or that you're the positional leader. But in the traditional sense of leadership in a company, it starts at the top. If I'm a department head or I'm a leader, let's just say I'm the COO or president of a company or even an executive director, regardless, and you have teams of people that in the hierarchy of the company, right, on the org chart, if you will, they're below you in the org chart, right? That is positional. But if I'm over those people, what am I doing to develop myself first? Because you're never going to know how to develop another person if you don't know how to develop yourself, right? And some of those characteristics, it starts with that self-awareness. Mm-hmm. You have a big responsibility to lead people. That's the biggest responsibility I've ever had in my entire life. Besides having my own children, having to lead them, I mean, there's no playbook for either one, right? You don't go and buy a parenting book unless you become a parent and you've experienced having children. You don't know what it's like having children. Okay. Same thing with being a leader. There's not an effective playbook out there, which we're hoping to change. But it all boils down to, if I can't develop those people, if I can't develop myself first. So identify what your opportunities are. But the things that we found right off the top, communication, connecting with people is number one of a challenge in leadership. Understand people.
In the movie talk, I get your definition of influence, because you don't, and I think it's completely right. It's not necessarily a position or something. You can be a project manager or a matrix manager. It's really the line of influence that you have, and you should lead, let's say, and use that as an opportunity.
Yeah.
And something that brought into my mind, Louis, is that one of the school teachers of my daughter said, "Look at the mirror." Because I was complaining on an attitude that my daughter was having, and I talked about that with the school teacher, and she told me, "Look at the mirror." And I was, "What mirror? What do you mean by that?" And then I was going, "Yeah, sure. Where it is coming from, it's from me, right? So I'm, as the leader of my daughter, as the parental leader somehow, of course, that's my line of influence, being good or bad, right?"
Mm-hmm.
So I like that definition quite a lot, I have to say.
Yeah, no, and you're absolutely right. I mean, because we're all leaders in something, right? We're people, and we have people around us. We're part of a community. We have neighbors. We have families. We're all leaders in some capacity, and that's where it starts, right? That's how we begin to learn how we can help out other people. Is where we are. And by meeting other people where they are, so that we can then connect with them, and what it comes down to is the value that you're adding to these people.
Mm-hmm.
When you speak with somebody in a way that in your mind is, how can I add value to this conversation? Then it's going to be a few things that are gonna happen. Number one, you're going to listen. You're going to be a lot less quick to jump in and interrupt and make a judgment. You're going to listen. That's number one. Number two, you're going to be attentive to the value that you can add to that person. It's amazing. I had an experience. I was a man. I led about 6 people at the time, and that was small in comparison. My last executive role, I led around 600 people. But this one, though, was so effective because as I was learning, and I realized that I'm trying to do the best I can as a leader as I'm developing, I had my one of my staff that I worked with, and he said, because you know what's the greatest thing about working with you? He says, you make me want to work. I want to come and work with you. And that really, really affected me, because if that's what we can do as leaders, and it all started with listening. And I asked, well, why, what are some of the things that you think I'm doing that? And he said, well, you listen, you provide me direct advice and guidance. You make a distinction between putting your foot down, but also doing it in a way that's going to help train me and coach me along the way. And I look at you as a mentor. See, those are all qualities of a successful leader. Just some of them.
I'm going to add 2 more.
Yeah, please go for it.
I think 2 more that come to mind is humility and empathy.
Yeah, it's true.
Those are a huge deficit right now. Other than the badness that we have a leadership sadness, as our mentors call it.
Leadership sad. Yeah.
And we need those 2. So not only is what we're talking about, communication and connecting, which is a part of it, but then you go a little bit further, and then the qualities and the traits are humility and empathy.
It's true. If you have those, I mean, if you have the humility piece right there, you're going to be always open to change and always open to ways that you can be better. That's the responsibility of a leader.
Mm-hmm.
And I always look it in the way of a servant, let's say, position, right? I mean, the people or the persons you influence are your clients, right? So, and not to say the buzzword of client centricity, but really to understand, to be passionate about the persons, right? To understand what is their, because we are all having, let's say, problems or strengths, weaknesses, but to really be passionate about the person that you work for, even our 400 or even only one or two. So what are their traits, right? What is their, maybe they have a bad day, right? And you should figure out, well, why they have a bad day. I mean, to care really about, let's say, the person, the person that you work for or that work with.
That's right. Right. Yeah, that's exactly it. That's exactly what it is. And that's what builds that connection. If you're not willing to put your ego aside and develop people and understand people and serve the people that you're leading, then you're not ready to be a leader.
I think there's even a book, right? So the boss eats last. I mean, you need to be willing to without any compromise to be the last one eating. So today I had a great experience. One of my employees was bringing me the lunch because I had no time for having lunch, and he was looking at me, looking at my calendar, and he said, "Well, let me bring you lunch, so you have even something to eat." And I think that's a very great attitude. And the same happened to me most likely when your employee told you it's so fun working with you because you really care.
Right.
So I'm asking myself why there are so less people these days that really care. And I'm asking myself what we can do in order to make them care again about. I mean, I hope that Corona helped us a little bit as a humankind to come closer, but I have most likely had too high expectations, right, on that end. But what is your idea on how we can, let's say, become a more connected society?
Yeah. Well, having podcasts like this and the awareness that's out there, right? You doing this alone and by as many people as we can to get that awareness out there to bring back to the root of really what true leadership is. The unfortunate reality is many companies in general go by an old methodology of what leadership really is and how positional that style is, and it's hopefully it is that, I mean, it's sad that a pandemic that we would hope that a pandemic would have positive influence on them to be able to see where they need to have some changes, right? But if we take and just look inward and we begin one person at a time, right?
It all starts with one person.
Yeah. And so we work on yourself, and then you share what you're working on with other people, and then encourage them to share. And see, that's what brings about unification, is having that one focus, and that one focus of doing what you can to help people in some sort of transformation. Obviously, you can't help them all. We can't, but we need other people, right? So we help other people, and then so we need other people to make that exposure happen. And then that's where we come in and say, let us come on in and give you the guidance, give you the training, give you the steps that you can take to help develop the necessary influence to really impact your people, because it's people first. Because when you focus on the value of people in your company or in life in general, everything else is a side effect of it. All the positive things that come out of that is a side effect, and those side effects will outweigh the time that you took to have to develop it. So it's essential if you really want to have ultimate success.
And Louis and Sherri, I think one thing that I also always said, well, if we get one person influenced to transform, it's more than yesterday. So I think that's the good side of also the idea of the podcast.
That's right.
So it has been a really great pleasure, and usually I use the opportunity to ask both of you, what would be the advice that you have set to your younger yourselves when you started your career to become the leader that you are, and also now being the leader whisperer and coach that you're doing today?
Yeah.
Well, I know for me, definitely personal development a lot sooner. I always knew about it, and I started a little bit. I had the leadership traits and qualities, but I wish I had a mentor earlier on, and I wish I did the personal development a little bit earlier on as well. Instead of learning almost everything the hard way. I did learn, what not to do and what I didn't like about leaders. And I also had some great leaders that I worked with that I learned a lot, and I made sure they were dear to me, that whenever I became a leadership role, that I wanted those certain qualities with that. So that's my biggest takeaway.
Love that. Thank you.
And for me, I would tell my younger self to get a coach earlier. I'm very fortunate to have my mother at a young age always encouraged me, instead of allowing me to listen to my own music when we went into the car, when she was dropping me off at school or at a friend's house. I wasn't allowed to listen to my own music. My mom would put in cassette tapes of Tony Robbins and John Maxwell and those types of people, so that I always was influenced by listening to it. But I would have, as I got into my management leadership careers over the last 28 years, I would have absolutely told myself, you need to sign up with an effective coach a lot sooner than you did.
Go for Leadership, the podcast with Daniel and Gert.
I like that as well. Thank you so much for being our guest today, and looking forward to stay in touch with both of you.
You bet. Thank you, Daniel.
Yeah, thank you, Daniel. Thank you so much. Keep going, and great work that you've done so far.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Go for Leadership, the podcast.